Welcome to my 100th YouTube video! Woohoo! Hello, fellow plant people. Welcome back to my channel. If you are returning, if you're new, hi. My name is Jen. I go by the Leafy Geek here and also on Instagram. And this is my 100th YouTube video. I started my plant channel just over a year ago. That was in January, I believe. Late January 2020, before all the madness happened. And here we are at 100. And I checked my follower count today. I have 361 wonderful people that are joining me for this fun little journey in my corner of plant tube. So I really wanted to thank you guys for being here, and it feels like a pretty decent milestone for me. I know I'm a small channel, I'm fine with that. I don't do this for the subscribers or to be monetized or anything like that. I just do it for fun. I'm here hanging out, talking about plants, and I'm glad you are too. So, for my 100th video, I decided it's gonna be pretty low-key, because that's just my style. But I figured that I would reach out to you guys here and also on Instagram to see if you had any questions for me. I've never done a Q&A before, and I thought that would be something kind of fun to do for my 100th, so that's what we're going to do. I have a few questions. Some of you guys did send in questions for me, so thank you so much for doing that. That means I get to do this video, so cool. Along with the questions, I'm probably going to do some plant chores around my house. There's some things that I've been meaning to do, some things that I have actually gotten in the mail that I ordered, so we can do kind of a haul. A lot of them are chore related though, so I'll show you some of those things. We'll do some plant maintenance and just some general, planty stuff, and I will answer your questions. So stay tuned, let's do this. So the first question I got was, it sounds like you're planning for a mid-May frost out date. What do you do if we have a late freeze? So that's a really good question. And that's from a fellow Minnesotan. If you are living in this part of the country, of the United States, your options for starting or for planting outdoors are more limited the earlier you opt to plant, and you are basically increasing your risk of losing your crops if you put them out too early, because we do still get frosts in early spring. We get snowstorms in early spring. Last year we had a frost in May. Like, it was right around, like, we were planting on what was on time for us, which is right around Mother's Day. That's kind of our plant out date as a rule, and we had a late frost last year. So that's a really good question. What do you do if we have a late freeze? Been there fairly recently. Last year there was a lot of bed sheets, a lot of staked tents to try and cover plants that were already established out in the garden, and there were a lot of tears and prayers. And I say that with, joking, but again, it was very unpredictable and kind of threw me for a loop. But yes, what I did last year was just, anything. I had extra tomato cages that I was able to just push into the dirt, and I draped towels and bed sheets over some of the more sensitive plants. There weren't a ton that were out right away at that time. I tend to plant out some of the cold hardy or frost hardy vegetables first and earliest. So those plants, even though they're small, they can withstand some lower temperatures, but anything below freezing, never great. So did have that extra layer of protection with whatever bed sheet or towel or tarp I could find. So it wasn't fun, but it's doable. I really, you keep an eye on the forecast. You see what's coming as much as you can around that time period. Anything that you put out earlier, you can. You just have to bear in mind that you're going to be paying a lot closer attention to the weather. to what that forecast looks like. So really, you know, keep up on that if you're opting to, or you can invest in something like a cold frame, or what I picked up. This is kind of part of my haul here. I don't really have a good image of this. I can't remember. I think it just came in a box that didn't have any pictures on it. But basically, I picked up a mini greenhouse. So this diorama is kind of what it's going to look like when I assemble it, but I'll probably just, if I can, I'll put up a picture of the, you know, just a screenshot of this thing that I purchased. I purchased it off of Amazon. It's the Quick Tent Mini Greenhouse. So it's 71 inches by 36 inches by 36 inches. So 71 is the length, and then 36 wide, 36 high. So it's, you know, it's meant to go on the ground. It's meant to basically protect plants in the event of colder weather, or to boost humidity inside that tent in warmer weather. But I think it's going to work if I plan my garden the way I think I'm going to plan it. And I will show you in a future video what that's going to look like. I'm going to map things out on camera for you and kind of show you how I'm going to build the garden. And what plants I'm putting where. So I'm kind of weighing some options right now between row crops, or like a row layout, or what's called an intensive planting layout, which we'll get into that. I digress. It's not for this video. But with that type of setup, with that intensive planting where you have things that are a little bit more compactly planted and closer together, it would be easier to maneuver a greenhouse like this, or a cold frame, I guess you could call it too, like this, to be able to cover more and feasibly protect more. So I'm growing a lot of cruciferous vegetables this year. So those are cold hardy. Some of them are frost hardy even. So I think that if I'm strategic about where and how I plant those, I might be able to get them out earlier than I am, you know, would have normally without something like this. So that's going to be something to play around with, and I'm going to, you know, look at my notes and look at kind of my garden plan and what my ideas have been and what I'm kind of weighing against, you know, in terms of planting for this year. So that's to come. But I did pick up this greenhouse, or this cold frame, which I think is going to be really, really helpful. But yeah, to answer the question, long story short, really it's hard to anticipate what the weather's going to do, but just to have materials on hand that you'd be able to cover your plants if needed, and just to really focus on that forecast and what it's looking like. Some plants are going to do okay with the soil temperature a certain level. Some plants do not do well below a certain threshold, and that should be noted if you're growing things from seed, or even if you pick up plants at your nursery or garden center. They're going to have planting instructions that are relevant to when is best and at what temperature is best for certain plants to do well outdoors. And my process is going to be kind of involved as well, because we do something called hardening off the seedlings, which is getting them accustomed to go outside because they've been used to this controlled environment indoors. So there's a gradual hardening off or boosting of their hardiness, so to speak, in order to prepare them to be planted outdoors. So you don't have all of your seedlings just die off because it's too much of a shock for them. So that's what this can also be used for, this cold frame greenhouse thing, and that greenhouse as well. That is not something that I'm going to necessarily be using indoors. I've seen this a lot. Let me grab this. Whew. So this, I know we're all familiar with. I'm pretty sure all of us have seen this type of setup featured on a houseplant YouTuber's video, one of them, or, you know, many of them. You know, how I set up my humidity-loving plants in my greenhouse. I've seen a ton of those. Maybe someday I would use this for something like that. But right now, I don't really have any houseplants that I'm ready to put into something like this indoors. But I did pick this up specifically for the purpose of hardening off my seedlings. So out on my patio, I get some really good bright and direct light during the day. And once it gets warmer, I'm going to be able to set this up out there and house some of my seedlings that are going to be making that transition. So they'll be moving from indoors to this kind of transition phase where they're living in the greenhouse gradually, more and more each day, and then eventually I'll be able to plant them. So this is going to give me more space once things start rocking and rolling over there, which they are already. That's the plan anyway. I've got quite a bit of stuff. So that's, that's the idea, is that these tools are going to help me be able to accommodate any weird weather situations that come up between now and planting, and even potentially right around planting. They're also going to be really useful for that purpose, for that really important process of making your seedlings stronger and more viable to be able to survive outdoors, which is the goal, right? We want to grow things and have them grow well and grow food for us. So hopefully these will help. Okay, switching gears to houseplants, I have a few cuttings that I want to get out of water. They've rooted in water, and I think it's time to get them into soil, but I might have additional plans for them down the road. But right now, temporarily, I need to get them into some soil. So I have a fairly chunky mix here. I am currently out of perlite, so I am hoping that this orchid bark will kind of do the job. I'm pretty sure it will. I think I have a couple of my aeroids in this type of mix, and it's really bark heavy, so I'm thinking it will be just fine. And I use a spoma soil and additives, so that's good to go. The first one I think I'm going to tackle is this guy. This is cuttings from my Marble Queen. Here's the mama plant, which is looking a lot better. This thing had some trouble adjusting to indoors again after this past summer. So I took a bunch of cuttings thinking that I might lose the mother plant because it just was yellowing like crazy. Every single time. Somebody gets thirsty every time I film a video. So I think what I'm going to do is, the goal is to add this back to the mama plant and make them one big plant again, which I would love to do now, but I kind of need to get a bigger pot for this one anyway, because I think it is time to repot soon. There's some roots poking out of the bottom of this one. Even though it doesn't look like a lot on top, I think the root structure is large enough that this summer I'm going to repot them together in a larger pot, and I think that will really make everything happy. But for now, because this has so many roots, I think I want to get this into its own soil situation for now. So I think I have this will do nicely, just temporarily. I know these can live indefinitely, almost indefinitely in water, but I really do want to get it into soil. So that is the plan, because it will be going into soil eventually. So see if I can make this interesting for you guys so you can actually see what I'm doing. So this is going to be Marble Queen, and then the next question I'm going to answer, how did you get into plants? That's a great question. I grew up kind of surrounded by gardening. That was my family's thing. My grandmother did a lot of gardening. My mom grew up on a farm here in Minnesota. And, just hang on a sec, look at those. Crazy, right? 4 cuttings. 4 cuttings worth of roots. My mother grew up on a farm, and so they were garden heavy, 4-H every year growing up. Grew a lot of their own food because there wasn't a lot of money to go around, and to, you know, spend on extravagances that way. So they were pretty self-sustaining, self-sufficient. And, you know, the necessities, growing the necessities, but also kind of transitioning into growing pretty things. My grandmother was renowned for her flower garden. And it's a gorgeous garden. My mom has inherited it and is basically now the caregiver of said garden. So, you know, growing up, we grew strawberries in my yard. My mom had a wonderful garden of, you know, at our house growing up, me and my brother. And it was just a really garden-friendly environment growing up. I can't say that I did a lot of gardening as a kid. I probably thought I was helping. I don't know. But I think that's really where it started for me, was outdoor gardening, which I've been doing the past several years. I started, actually, I want to say I got serious about it when I lived in a roommate situation in Minneapolis. This was back in 2008. That's really when I got serious, because my roommates and I created kind of a community garden for our neighbors and for us. And we grew so many vegetables in that thing, and it was just this beautiful addition to our little living situation, and it, you know, created community, fostered community in that neighborhood in South Minneapolis where we were living. And I love that. I really feel like gardening brings people together, and in turn, plants bring people together. There's just something about getting your hands dirty and, you know, fostering and cultivating something and helping it survive and thrive and grow under your care. It's a really wonderful experience, and it brings people together. I've experienced that here in Houseplant YouTube as well. People just really enjoy getting to know each other and learning from each other. And that's part of the reason why I started my channel, was I wanted to use the knowledge that I've acquired from my experience really starting gardening and moving to plants quickly, because, you know, as a new passion does, it moves quickly, and suddenly you find yourself surrounded by the thing that you are passionate about. And that's kind of this universal story, I think, for most of us who are on here. So I want to credit my family and my gardening background, but I also give credit where credit's due, and this community is amazing. I've, you know, gotten to learn from so many houseplant enthusiasts on here, both people that I follow who have channels and people who are following me who, you know, leave communication and comments down in my videos. That's amazing. I love that. Please do more of that. Here, I'll just show you that. I got that all potted up. I'll give this a water. I'll give everything a water once it's all in place. But back to the question. If you could pick only one genus of plants to grow in your home, what would it be? Pretty darn certain that's Hoya. If I had to pick, it would be Hoya. I would choose Hoya. And speaking of Hoya, I've got this one little guy here. This is a cutting that was very slow to root. This was an order that I believe, this is from Jaya's Jungle. This is one of the Hoya I got in a little Hoya order. I think there were 3 or 4 Hoya in that order, and the rest of them rooted up real quickly. This one took a while. And I'm checking the roots, and I'm not seeing a whole lot here. Oh, bummer. So the plant feels fine. Just trying to determine what the best way moving forward. There's even a new grow point on it. I don't know if you can see that. How is this possible? There are just no roots. So what I think I'm going to have to do, and it looks like the stem is kind of rotting back, if you can see that. So I've been having some difficulties with this one. I don't even think I remember what the variety of Hoya is, of this particular one. But what I'm going to have to do, it looks like, is I'm going to try, I had this in moss. It wasn't working in water. And so I tried sphagnum moss, and that apparently isn't working either. So I'm going to toss this. I don't know if you can see back here. I have a little glass cloche. It's one of those Target cookie jars that you can pick up, fairly large. So I just have a bunch of like damp perlite. I hate the word moist. I almost used it, and then I said it, and so now it's like whatever. I have moist perlite in that jar. That has the remains of Hoya callistophylla that I had gotten that had a very serious decline. Had to chop and chop and chop and chop back to the only node that was left. Basically, I had 2 chances left. One of those chances rotted out. This one, the last remaining piece of that plant, grew roots. So I am protecting that thing at all costs. It's staying in that jar until it has like a big, substantial ball of roots. So I might have to add this little guy into that environment and see if the combination there fosters some growth out of this last kind of remaining node. Bummer, dude. Anyway, it would be Hoya. Okay, I think I have just enough soil for one more plant to pot up, and that's going to be this Epiphyllum that I have here. I was rooting this guy, or re-rooting it, I should say, because I ended up taking cuttings because I think the plant had scale. So I treated some of these offshoots that weren't affected yet. It was early stage scale. One of my other epiphyllums just totally got eaten alive by scale, and that was after repeated treatings on it, and this was its closest neighbor. So taking the precautions that I did felt necessary at the time, but I did end up getting a few really good cuttings from it. These little paddles grew in my care, so that was cool. I'm able to keep some of the plant at least. It's been sitting in quarantine for a while it's been rooting, and it's actually done really well. These 3 cuttings in here have grown some pretty darn good roots, and so I think it's time to get it into a more comfortable situation, if you will. So we're going to do that, and I'm going to just keep rolling with these questions, because I don't want this video to turn into the video version of a novel. Alright, so the next one is, do you remember what your first plant was? I think so. I'm pretty sure when I was in elementary school or middle school or something like that, I had a cactus. As we all know how those tend to go when you are not really actively looking at plant care and how to care for plants. Pretty sure I overwatered that thing to death. But I'm pretty sure it was a cactus. I would say the first plant that I got that was memorable for me, that I purchased on my own and stayed with me and is actually still with me, is this plant. That plant right there. So that is my philodendron, my heartleaf philodendron, and I purchased that plant on my way to college. And that was back, oh, do I want to tell you how old I am? That was back in the early 2000s, and I bought it for my dorm room, kind of on a whim, I think, and it stayed with me through college. It survived college, the dorms, my off-campus apartment. My mother took care of it when I went to grad school, but it had remained with in the family, I guess, through that time when I was in grad school. And then when I moved back, I definitely readopted it, and it's just been doing great for the most part. We've had a couple of bumps along the way related to some overwatering when I was away from it, when it was living with other members of my family. And that was resolved. We ended up fixing that issue, and it is thriving today. It's growing up on that trellis back there, It's in an interior area of my home. It doesn't seem to mind that at all, and it's just continuing to grow. It's starting to grow up the walls, actually, so that's kind of fun. Next question, how does your partner feel about your plants? I am single, and my hound dog doesn't seem to care. So that answers that. What was the plant that was the most painful to lose or have die? Well, you know, any plant loss is somewhat painful for me because my green thumb is just so strong that I hate that. And I know that's kind of, sometimes it's the natural order of things, sometimes there's just a compatibility issue, sometimes there's a pest issue outside of your control. That said, I would probably say that it's the most painful loss for me is actually still in progress, I think, or I'm fighting my way out of the loss. And that would be with my Hoya callistophylla right here. And that plant came to me big and beautiful and seemingly robust. And unfortunately, that didn't end up being the case with its root system. It had developed what I think was probably some pretty significant root rot, either prior to being in my home or shortly, you know, in that time span. And so I ended up, you know, noticing it decline. I hadn't repotted it. It was just kind of letting it adjust, and it was declining, and leaves were yellowing, and the stems were softening. And I checked, and yeah, it basically didn't have any roots. So that's the struggle of that plant, and it's unfortunate because it was probably the most expensive plant I've ever purchased for myself as well. But like I mentioned, it's going to at some point hopefully rebound because I do have root system growth currently on this one remaining piece. It's still kind of a tough loss for me. There we go. Epiphyllum. Hopefully this one isn't going to be a loss. I think I planted this one upside down. I don't know. I've noticed when they develop roots along their stems, they tend to develop on the underside. And obviously I think that's because they're creeping. Epiphyllums sometimes cling to the trunks of trees and will wrap around them, which is really, really, really rad. And I wish I could get one of mine to do that. But they're all kind of small, and I don't think that would be a thing. But worth a try. But it looks like, you can see that, I planted this one. So maybe it'll just kind of slowly migrate to the other side. But yeah, Epiphyllum hookeri, potted up, ready to go. For my next trick, I have a few plants that aren't doing great, and my main goal is to check their roots and potentially see if there's anything to salvage, because these plants are looking a little bit rough. Specifically, my Crimson Princess Hoya has been on the slow and steady decline over the past few days, week-ish, and I haven't changed anything about its care from when it was doing really well. So I'm going to check the roots. I've got one rooted kind of stem in this pot that is fine, and the rest are really, really desiccated and not doing well. So I think it's a root issue. Obviously that's usually the case when you have plants that look like this. Just very papery and kind of done. So I'm going to dump out all the soil and take a look at the roots. I also have a variegated wayettii that is in a similar state. There are a few pieces of this plant, or a few stems in this pot that are fine, and then there are some that are just really desiccated and not doing well. So kind of try and triage them a little bit and see if there's anything I can do to salvage. All right, I'm going to answer the next question, which is, what do you think about importing plants from other countries? That's interesting because, well, I don't know how interesting it's going to be for you because I don't have any plants in my collection that I've imported. It's not something I've really gotten into yet. I say yet, but also I really don't know how I feel about it. I know that other YouTubers have had really good experiences, And some have not. Some have had pretty terrible experiences. But again, that kind of, it's very subjective. And I think that, depending on the time of year that you're shipping and just kind of what the state of affairs are, the expectation with importing can be high because usually the plants are a lot more expensive. But it's also kind of risky, so it's an at your own risk situation. I don't feel qualified to really opine much on this topic, but that's not to say that I wouldn't try ordering from overseas in the future. I just haven't. I want to see some sad roots. Very, very dry, and definitely root rot. So this one for sure I'm cutting all the way back. This one, similar situation. It's very dry, and the outer piece of the root you can see is kind of sloughing off. Oh, bummer. But it happens. It does happen. Whereas this one, I think you see some root rot, but we've got some healthy roots on here. So this one I'm more optimistic about. So this one I'm going to get into water pretty much right away. The others, when I'm rooting like that, I mean, I have rooting hormone powder, so I think I'll use that on all of these, because that also prevents or kind of attempts to stop the the root rot from getting worse. But ooh, that does not look great. But yeah, this one is kind of borderline. This one, better shape than the others, but still not great. So we'll work on this one for sure. So I might be able to preserve at least a smaller part of the plant. Checking the wayettii now. Next question, how do you handle plant care when you go on longer vacations or travel? And there's an addendum to that question, pre-pandemic. I haven't done any traveling for a very long time. I mean, honestly, I have a family member usually check on them if it's going to be longer than a week, specifically certain plants. So, for a long time I didn't have many plants that were considered high maintenance. So usually a week was fine. But now that I have a few in my collection that maybe need a little bit more attention, like every couple days or something like that, I think that I would enlist a family member, to be able to water them. And what I would usually do, for the few plants that I'd ask them to check on, I would just pull them from their spots into a central location where they're still getting light, and just make it easier for that person. Because I have right around 200 plants, and so I think that whatever I could do to make it easier for them not to kill anything or to miss anything would be critical. Okay, roots, just kind of detangling here, gently. So the few that are maybe looking like they have the best chance of bouncing back, look at this one. I'm going to try and salvage the roots that they have, but some of these other ones I'm just going to be cutting all the way back and starting over. Last question for this video is, what are your favorite hidden gem houseplants? I'm going to go grab them and I'm going to show you. So I've got 3 plants in front of me right now. One is kind of a sentimental one because it was highlighted in one of my first plant unboxings that I ever did on this channel. One is kind of one of my favorite success stories of how I rehabbed a plant that was declining when it got to me. And then one is just pretty. We'll start with that one. So this is my black Pagoda Lipstick Plant, and I love this plant so much. It just adds so much joy for me, and the coloration is really cool. I have it in some pretty high light. As you can see, that's what happens to the undersides of the leaves in very bright, it is indirect. It's under a grow light, but it's quite close. It's not directly underneath it, but it's very closely adjacent to it. So it gets a lot of bright artificial light right there. And so this side of the plant, as you can see, is the one that's on the grow light side. This is the one that's on the other side, which it's doing okay, this little vine. But obviously you can see there's new growth out of both vines. I had 2 plants in one when I got this. And so that new growth is popping up, and there's even a flower or something. I haven't seen that develop on this plant before. I think that's a flower. Cool. The next hidden gem in my collection is my Hoya Jennifer. And this one is special to me because it was awful. It was in really rough shape when I got it. It was just these 2 bottom leaves, and they were bright yellow, and I had no idea if the thing was going to even survive. It lived in a glass cloche similar to the callistophylla for the better part of, God, I don't even know, 6 months? Longer than that? And it did nothing for a long time until it shot out this stem, and it rehabbed itself for the most part. I pretty much just left it alone, but as you can see, since then it's grown slowly, but it has grown, and I feel really good about this plant now. It just, I would have hated to lose it. And now that I have this much of the plant, I feel like I realize just how much I would have been missing. So it's just a really cool plant. I'm really happy that it survived and is still with me. The last hidden gem in my collection it's one that I don't normally feature a lot on this channel, and it is my Dischidia ovata. And I got this from Steve's Leaves. This is probably one of the first Steve's Leaves orders that I ever made, I want to say. It's definitely in my video history. There's an unboxing, so I'll make sure that's linked on this video as well. But it's just such a cool, understated plant. It just continues to do its own thing. It's very low maintenance, I've found. And it really seems to be waking up now because you see this darker, kind of bronze, brown colored new growth popping out just from the top, which is great. I wasn't sure if I would lose growth up on the top because I kind of have it higher set in a shelf in my Hoya room, or my plant room, that I wasn't certain was getting enough light up top, but it seems to be liking its location. And it's just a really fun Dischidia. It just drapes, and the coloration on the leaves is so cool. And I have it in this really neat cache po. It's just like a Grecian urn. And so it sits really nice and high and stately and just cascades over and is lush and full. And I really appreciate what it adds to the ambiance in that room. So that is my 3rd hidden gem. So that is it from me. Thank you so much, you guys, for following and subscribing and commenting and making this place so enjoyable. I am thrilled to be on YouTube still, even a year later and 100 videos later. I'm just having fun. That's what this is all about for me. So thank you so much for joining me and watching this video and others if you have. And I hope you stick around, and I'll just keep doing planty stuff and telling you all about it. So until next time, friends, enjoy your plants.